Hi everyone, Heather here with astrologywithheather.com, and welcome to my very first video in my series all about anxiety and stress in astrology. And this is a very special series that I've been planning to do for quite some time now. It's sort of like a merging of all of my background and passions and experience and education in astrology, psychology, and working with people with anxiety and dealing with anxiety in my own life. And so for some of you might already know that I am a professional astrologer. This is my YouTube channel where I do weekly astrology forecasts and astrology tutorials. But some of you may not know that I also have a background in psychology. I have a master's degree actually in clinical psychology, and I also have a certification in yoga and an additional certification in trauma-informed yoga therapy. And I also when I was in graduate school, did my master's thesis on stress response, so cortisol in response to stress, and the effect of mind-body therapies on cortisol in response to stress and subsequent hippocampal memory function. The hippocampus is the part of the brain that processes emotional episodic memory, so memory of actual events as if it's playing like a movie in your head, and this type of memory is affected by cortisol. But anyway, the reason that I'm doing these videos is because I find that a lot of my clients are overwhelmed, overstressed, burnt out, and I was in that place at one point in my life. In my teens and early 20s, I was very anxious. When I started school in my graduate program, I didn't even realize that I had issues with anxiety until I started learning about anxiety, and I realized, this sounds a lot like me. And that was also around the time that I discovered yoga and I got really into these mind-body therapies, and that's also around the time when I discovered astrology and started to realize how astrology can really help us to decode sort of first off, our own psychology, right? Even Carl Jung was very interested in astrology. He was a very prominent psychologist, and he talks a lot about astrology in his work. And so what I'm doing with these videos is I'm going to, in this very first video, explain to you, first off, what is anxiety. I'm going to explain to you certain astrological markers for anxiety in the birth chart based on primarily my own research, along with the help of one of my teachers, Lynn Coiner, who was able to offer some additional insight and information. I'm lucky to have some really awesome, wonderful teachers that can help guide me in the right directions. And so I'm going to tell you about these astrological signatures and then what you can do to sort of mitigate the predisposition toward anxiety, stress, burnout, all of that. And then I'll give you a few tips and tricks for just calming the body and calming the mind and dealing with stress and anxiety throughout the day on a day-to-day basis. And so before I get into all of this, I do want to just let you guys all know that this is not to be taken as medical advice. I don't want anybody going out there and using this information to diagnose people with anxiety disorders. That's not what this is, and that would not be correct or accurate or advisable to do. If you do have an issue with anxiety or another health condition, I highly recommend that you seek help from a qualified practitioner, a counselor, or a doctor or an alternative therapist of your choosing. But this is just, for informational purposes only, so you can understand a little bit more about yourself, about your clients, about people in your life, and, maybe it can help you to find a little bit more calm. And so let's start with, first off, what is anxiety? Anxiety is essentially an overactivation of the sympathetic nervous system. And so what is the sympathetic nervous system? Well, the sympathetic nervous system is what we often refer to as the fight or flight response. And I think it's now fight, flight, or freeze, right? And so this is the response that the body produces when you are in a state of danger. And so when you are in sort of past history, right? Back in the day when we didn't have this constant stress and this constant overactivation of the sympathetic nervous system, which is really prevalent in this day and age, the fight or flight response would become active in response to immediate danger. So the sympathetic nervous system becomes active if you're injured, if you're sick, if you're running from a bear. And so we want it to activate when we do all of these things because it boosts our immune system. It causes us to be able to react really quickly to things. It concentrates energy and blood flow to the major muscle groups so that way we can run or fight if we need to. But when it becomes overactivated, which is what is very prevalent in our society today, most of us are running from a place of sympathetic nervous system overactivation, which means that our sympathetic nervous systems are being activated in response to benign stimuli, to everyday situations, because we are under this constant pressure and this chronic sort of stress. And so our sympathetic nervous system learns to activate in response to things that are not life-threatening and that are, pretty much benign. They're not going to kill you in the moment. And what anxiety is the pairing of this sympathetic nervous system activation with completely benign stimuli that are not life-threatening. So everyday situations like checking your emails or going to the grocery store or certain frequencies of light or certain sounds, smells, colors, interacting with people, these types of things. Through conditioning, our response to these things that are pretty normal to encounter in our day-to-day life becomes a response as if these situations are life-threatening. And when the sympathetic nervous system is overactive, it actually impairs our immune system. It causes inflammation throughout the body or exacerbates it. It can lead to things like chronic illness. And it does, lead to issues with anxiety, issues with burnout, issues with fatigue, issues with just being nervous and on edge all of the time. And so anxiety is just a misfire of the sympathetic nervous system. It's your brain and your body reacting to something that is not life-threatening as if it were life-threatening. And so the opposite of sympathetic nervous system activation is parasympathetic nervous system activation. The parasympathetic nervous system is the rest and relax response. It helps us to just, it's the response that our body has to just being relaxed, being in a normal, relaxed state where we're digesting our food, our body is functioning normally and optimally. And this is where we want to be in a normal situation, while most of us are actually activating our sympathetic nervous systems all day long. And that's not good for us, right? That's not good for our body. That's not good for our mental health. That's not good for our productivity. And so, what I like to teach people and what I do like to talk about a lot is how to create space in your day and do little things throughout your day to activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which is that rest and relax response, and downregulate the sympathetic nervous system activation, because we only want that active if there's, an immediate pressing danger. And so that being said, now that we have an idea of what anxiety actually is, it's a misfire of that sympathetic nervous system, an overreaction to something with the body and the nervous system and the brain. What are the anxiety markers that are found in the birth chart very commonly? And so, again, I don't want you to be diagnosing people with anxiety with this. This is just for educational purposes, so you can see maybe you have some of these markers. Maybe you're prone to burnout or being a little overly anxious, a little overly excitable, a little high-strung. And so there are several different markers. This is not an all-inclusive list. These are just the things that I have seen most predominantly in the charts of people through my own research, my own experience in working with clients. I've collected hundreds and hundreds of charts. I've been looking at these for quite some time. And there are certain markers that really stand out that are very prevalent for people who experience anxiety, or who are just prone to being more nervous or on edge. And so I'm going to go through some of these markers and just give little tips and tricks as to what you can do to mitigate that energy. And I will be going through each of these markers individually in separate videos, more in depth later on down the line as I go through this series. So I just want to give you a little taste of what we're working with today. Okay, so the first marker that I want to talk about has to do with the signs. And so when we have planets in certain signs, there are certain signs that are associated with adrenal, activation, with stress response, with crisis, with fear. And so a lot of times when people have a configuration of planets in the cardinal signs, so the cardinal signs deal with crisis, and the cardinal signs are Cancer. So it's Cancer, Libra, Capricorn, and Aries are the cardinal signs. And so when you have a lot of planets in these signs, especially in the sign of Cancer, and especially if these planets are forming a T-square or a grand cardinal cross, this indicates that the person might be a little bit more high-strung and a little bit more prone to anxiety. Cancer in particular tends to be more anxiety prone. Cancer gets very nervous and protective of their comfort zones, their safety, the things and the people that they care about, their emotional well-being, their emotional comfort zones. And Cancer, out of all the cardinal signs, because the cardinal signs do have an association with crisis, is the sign that tends to sidestep things. It tends to approach crisis indirectly. If you think about a crab is sort of moving sideways, right? It's not just running straight at you. It might pinch you if you get too close or if it feels threatened, but it kind of goes sideways. It approaches things indirectly. And so this can cause an exacerbation of problems when you're not facing things head on. And so it can lead to just dealing with crisis maybe inappropriately. Also, Cancers tend to be the nurturers, so they do tend to take on the burden of responsibility for other people's problems because they're the caregivers of the zodiac. Virgo, similar thing. Virgos tend to want to be of service to other people. They tend to be very perfectionistic. And Virgo is another sign where if you have a lot of planets in Virgo, especially the personal planets, and so when I say personal planets, I mean, Sun through Saturn, but especially Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, and Mars, the planets that are going to be affecting your personality more predominantly. So if you have a lot of those planets in the sign of Virgo, or the ascendant in the sign of Virgo or Cancer, you might be more prone to nervousness, to being more high-strung, to overthinking things, and you might run a little bit more anxious than other people. And this is really well known for Virgos in particular. Virgo is the sign that's associated with nervousness and anxiety and perfectionism and overthinking things, right? And so, this isn't really news to anyone who has a lot of Virgo energy. And so Virgo can be a marker for just being more high-strung, and so that's something to be aware of. Virgos need more time for self-care. They need more time in their own space. They need more time for calm. They need to work on not being so hard on themselves, not placing high demands on themselves and judging themselves for not living up to their own expectations, that type of thing. Because Virgo is a very perfectionistic sign, there can be a lot of over-concern with, the details and all of that, which can lead to anxiety. Also, control issues with Virgo, wanting to control everything and make sure that it turns out the way that you want it to, that it goes according to plan. These types of things are, Virgo traits. I mean, Virgos also have some really positive traits. Obviously, I'm a Virgo myself, so I know the good, the bad, the ugly with Virgo. And the highest expression of Virgo is to show up in service. And typically with a Virgo, they'll make sure that their needs are cared for before they care for the needs of others. But, sometimes Virgos can be very hard on themselves, and so they can end up burnt out. So there is a such thing as Virgo burnout, and I've experienced it in my own life. It's real. And so you need to make sure, as a Virgo or as somebody with a lot of planets in this energy, that you're exercising good self-care, that you're making sure that you have good habits and routines, and that you're not being so hard on yourself. The other indicator that I've noticed is really common is Sun with Mars, either in conjunction or a square, and sometimes in opposition. This makes people very high energy and very high strung. And so this is an issue with too much energy coursing through the body, where people who have Sun with Mars, they need a good physical outlet for this energy. Otherwise, it's going to be internalized and it's going to manifest as physiological stress, anxiety, there's just a lot of energy with this type of configuration in the chart. And so I've noticed that people who have Sun with Mars are more prone to anxiety, but they do really well in situations where they need to jump into things head on. They're very ambitious, they're very driven, they're very assertive, but it can be a little bit overkill. And they definitely, if you have a strong Mars energy with your Sun, I highly recommend having some sort of physical outlet with some sort of intense physical activity on a regular basis, and that will actually help to calm the body and nervous system. And in general, getting exercise, movement is really good for reducing the effects of stress and anxiety on the body and on the nervous system. The other thing that I've noticed that's very common, and this is a common configuration because Mercury is always very close to the Sun in the sky. Mercury doesn't fall very far from the Sun. And so when Mercury is with the Sun in a conjunction, this is called combust when you have a planet with the Sun. This exacerbates some of the more difficult qualities of Mercury. And so this is especially true for people who have Mercury retrograde in a conjunction with the Sun. When Mercury is in retrograde, it's 3 times closer to the Earth, so it's 3 times stronger in the skies. And so it indicates that your mind and your mental activity is going to be 3 times stronger, right? So you're 3 times probably more intelligent. Usually people who have Mercury retrograde are very highly intelligent, but they tend to internalize their thoughts. They tend to ruminate on things. And this is exacerbated, especially when you have the Sun with Mercury. And the Sun with Mercury doesn't have to be a Mercury retrograde for this to be true. Anyone who has the Sun with Mercury, a combust Mercury, there's a tendency to be very intelligent, but to overthink things, to ruminate on things, to have thoughts that are sort of racing and going round and round in your head all the time. And so it can be very difficult to rein that in and to calm the mind. And so there's always thoughts and conversations going on in your head. You can be playing and replaying conversations, making lists, thinking about what you need to do today, having all these ideas. And so when you have the Sun with Mercury, one of the things that I always recommend is having an outlet through communication, even if it's just communicating with yourself through writing and journaling. And so writing things down, getting it out of your head is key. And even if you just have to write it all out just to purge it, and to get rid of it, that's going to help you, because once it's out of your head, you don't have to keep thinking about it, because if you want to, you can go back and look at it later. And usually you'll find that you don't need to, because most of the things you're thinking about, it's just overkill, right? So journaling is really important for Mercury Sun conjunctions. Having somebody that you can talk things out with so you can express that mental energy, and having a good outlet for your intelligence, for your rational, logical, linear thinking in your work, that can be a really important way to utilize that energy as well. Another one that I noticed is really common is Sun square Pluto is very common with trauma and PTSD. If you have Sun square Pluto, especially with Mars, it could be that you had to deal with a lot of intensity in your early childhood environment or throughout your life, intensity directed toward you, intense situations, a lot of crisis. It's not always the case, but it is sometimes the case, and it's not always the case that people have trauma and PTSD with this. It just is more common than not with this sort of configuration. And so this can exacerbate this sympathetic nervous system overactivation as well, because you're conditioned to be dealing with crisis, right? To be dealing with these intense situations. So you're always in this fight or flight mode, waiting for the next shoe to drop. The other thing that I have seen is Mercury with Mars or Uranus. So it's a similar energy to having Mars with the Sun, except with Mercury with Mars, your brain thinks very quickly. And so you're having a lot of thoughts, they're very quick, you speak quickly, and Mercury rules the brain and nervous system. And so this could be just a really intense activation of the nervous system. It's going very strong with Mercury and Mars. And so, that's another one where you need not only a good mental outlet, but a good physical outlet to maintain balance and harmony with the nervous system. One that Lynn Coiner helped me to figure out, because I recently did a course with her, and she was kind enough to help me with my research by giving me some of her own insights. And also we worked through some of this together, and she was actually able to help me to identify a couple of patterns that I hadn't previously noticed when I was going through this, that I'd missed over. And one of those patterns was Mercury with Saturn, especially in square, opposition, or conjunction. And so Mercury with Saturn is very specific in that it brings an anxiety around feeling or appearing unintelligent. So people who have Mercury with Saturn, they're afraid of feeling stupid. And so this can bring a bit of a social anxiety, because you don't want to appear like you don't know what you're talking about. And so there can be a lot of fear and anxiety around that. And then finally, the last thing I just want to mention is Neptune. So Neptune in general in astrology, if you have it by transit, or if you have it with your moon or with your sun or with your Mercury, can bring this sort of free-floating sense of anxiety, this ominous energy where you're constantly waiting for something to happen, but nothing usually does. It's sort of like there's something going on in the ethers and you can't quite pinpoint what it is. And in the birth chart, if you have Neptune in the 12th house, and this is another one that it was passed on to me from my work with Lynn Coiner, from my studies with Lynn Coiner. Neptune in the 12th house can make somebody highly, highly sensitive, highly intuitive, very psychic. And so when you have Neptune in the 12th house, you're very aware and very sensitive to everything that's going on in your environment. And usually you have some sort of psychic abilities. It's really good for mediumship, for being psychic, for having really deep empathy and understanding of the interconnectedness of all things, for picking up on ethereal energies. And usually in childhood, you're taught that this is not a good thing, and so you become afraid of these abilities and you try to suppress it. And so there can actually be a fear around picking up on this psychic energy, and there can also be a tendency to want to block it out or to hide from it. And this can also, just in general, because these people are so sensitive, they're going to be more sensitive and more reactive to everything that they encounter, including stress, including, day-to-day normal routine activities, because they are highly sensitive people. And so that Neptune energy can be very strong in the charts of people who have issues with anxiety, burnout, stress, that type of thing. All right, and so what do we do with this, right? So you have a lot of markers, let's say, for stress, for anxiety, for burnout in your chart. What can you do in just sort of a normal day-to-day routine fashion to help regulate the nervous system, to upregulate that parasympathetic nervous system and downregulate the sympathetic nervous system, that fight or flight response? First and foremost, taking time to relax and rest and to flow within the rhythm of your natural cycles, looking into those types of things, which I'll do more videos on later on down the line in this series, of course. That's one thing that you can absolutely do, making sure that you're taking time out for yourself, having proper nutrition, because having poor nutrition, eating things like sugar and like a lot of grains and pro-inflammatory foods, inflammation fuels anxiety, right? So you don't want to exacerbate it with these types of things. So having a good, healthy, balanced diet, and physical activity and exercise is very well known. It can be a very powerful tool in healing from things like depression, anxiety, and pretty much all mental health issues, because the mind and body are one thing, right? They're interconnected. They all work synergistically. And so making sure that you're taking time to exercise and take care of yourself, all those things that we all know that we should be doing, you actually need to do them, especially if you're somebody who's suffering from anxiety. The other thing you can do are you can utilize simple tools in your day-to-day experience to sort of calm the sympathetic nervous system and upregulate, again, that parasympathetic, that rest and digest response. The first thing that you can do that's really simple is called diaphragmatic breathing. So this is where you breathe from your belly, from your diaphragm, instead of from your chest. About a third of the population are chest breathers, and when you breathe these shallow breaths only in your chest, it actually activates the sympathetic nervous system, so it exacerbates anxiety and stress and the effects of stress and anxiety on your body. And so you can very easily tell if you are a chest breather or a belly breather by just placing your hand on your chest and your stomach and just breathing. If your stomach is rising and falling with your breath, then you're breathing in a correct manner. If it's only your chest that's rising and falling, then you're doing the chest breathing, and that's going to be exacerbating things. And so one of the ways that you can calm the body and nervous system is by practicing diaphragmatic breathing. So breathing, taking a breath with the belly first, so putting your hand on your belly and one hand on your chest. It's best to do this while lying down, and inhaling all the way down from the base of the belly all the way up to the top of the chest. and then, exhaling in the same fashion, chest first and then the belly. And at first, if this is something that you're not used to doing, if you are a chest breather and not a belly breather, this can feel very awkward. I know for me, when I first learned about this in one of my cognitive behavioral therapy courses, I was shocked to find that I was breathing from my chest, and it was actually very, very difficult for me to breathe from my diaphragm. But after practice, just practicing a couple minutes each day, it became natural, and now I breathe naturally from the diaphragm. And you can, experience that same thing, just a little bit of work at it, just a few minutes each day, and that can actually help. And when you're feeling stressed, you can focus on breathing from the diaphragm, and that can help calm the nervous system. The second thing that you can do, which is another form of breath work, is which has been actually known to calm the nervous system and to activate the parasympathetic nervous system for thousands of years. It's only now that science is sort of catching up with these types of things, but you can extend your exhale. So the inhale activates the sympathetic nervous system, the exhale activates the parasympathetic nervous system. And so by extending the exhale, so breathing in maybe for the count of 3, like 1, 2, 3, and then exhaling to the count of 6. Right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but slowly. Doing that in repetition will actually very easily and very quickly calm the nervous system. It'll help you to feel much more relaxed. It'll disengage that sympathetic nervous system activity. And so that's another really powerful, very simple tool, and you can utilize that throughout your day as you're going about your work, you're driving your car, doing your groceries, just extending the exhale. I highly recommend practicing this for 10 to 15 minutes each day if you can, just sitting in meditation and just focusing on the breath and extending the exhale. It's a really good practice to do, and it helps to calm the body and put you in a good state of mind and to balance the nervous system so you can go about your day feeling much more rested, much more focused, much more calm and relaxed. The third thing is something that is a sort of a combination of a lot of different things I learned from a lot of different places, where if you're in the moment starting to feel very anxious or very stressed out about something, this is something that you can do very easily. And I recommend doing this anytime you feel anxious or stressed out and you start to feel those first symptoms of anxiety or stress creeping in. If you do this in this way and you do it every single time, it's actually going to help to reprogram your brain to pair these different situations, these different triggers for stress and anxiety with parasympathetic activation instead of sympathetic activation. So this is going to immediately cause you to feel calm in these situations once you've repeated this practice enough times, right? So the way that you do this is very simple. As soon as you start feeling stressed, you say stop. You can put your hand out, you can say it out loud. That's the best way to do it if you're on your own or if you don't care about looking weird. You can envision a stop sign or a red light in your mind and pair these things all together. So stop, and visualize a stop sign as soon as that anxiety creeps in. From there, you tell yourself, this is just my sympathetic nervous system overreacting to something, and I can change this, right? Because you can, and you know how to change this. From there, all you have to do is activate the sympathetic nervous system, and we already know how to do that because I just told you. So the best way to do that is to do the extended exhale breath, or to do what's called kaki pranayama, which is a breathing exercise where you inhale through the nose, and then you exhale through the mouth with pursed lips as if you're blowing through a straw, very slowly as you can. And to add another layer to this and make it work even more effectively, what you can do is you can actually inhale through the nose and then exhale through pursed lips, blowing on your palm. And so when you blow on your palm, this adds a tactile stimulation component to it. And if you close your eyes and focus on that feeling, that sensation on your hand, that increases the effectiveness of this practice even more so. And so what this does with the tactile sensation is that also it adds another component that helps to stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system. It grounds your energy, it brings you back into your body, and you're focusing on the here, the now, what's tactile, instead of what's going on in your mind, all of these external situations. It brings you back into the here and now, and it really calms the body and the nervous system. And so those are my little exercises that you can do. And yeah, so I hope you found this video helpful. I'm going to be doing a lot of videos on these types of topics in the future. I have one planned for insomnia. I have a lot of different ideas, and so you'll be seeing more of this. So thank you again for watching this video. If you like this video, be sure to like the video, subscribe to my channel. If you have any questions or feedback about what I just told you, please feel free to comment in the comment section below. I love hearing from you, and I always like to try to answer and respond to as many comments as possible. And yeah, I will see you guys next time. And if you want to book a reading with me, you can always do so. The link to book a reading is down in the description of this video below. Thank you again. Bye.